Welcome to the Wired for Success podcast, your show for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs who want to build million-dollar businesses without sacrificing their health, relationships, or happiness, who understand that in order to build their empire, they need a solid foundation, and that the more they are thriving, the more their business is thriving too. This show brings you the very best from science, self-development, and entrepreneurship to set you up for sustainable success. Hi, I'm Claudia Garbutt, the scientist turned mindset and high performance coach for entrepreneurs, and I help you get wired for success. Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Wired for Success podcast, where we talk about all things science, self-development, and entrepreneurship that help you get to that next level of success in your life and business. My guest today is author, speaker, and business advisor Ian Williams, whose humanitarian and environmental values were shaped by the landscapes of Minnesota during his youth. Then a single mystical experience transformed his life at the age of 24, and a decade of spiritual immersion and self-discovery followed that revealed a fundamental truth. Saving ourselves is the only path to saving the world. Now he devotes himself to generating positive change for the common good through his personal and professional endeavors. Ian has a master's in public affairs with an emphasis in leadership strategy and organizational culture. His background in education, mindfulness, and regenerative design informs his business advising, and he works primarily with mission-driven organizations on the front lines of social and environmental justice to help them grow healthy cultures in people and environmental impact. So it sounds like both of us really care about health and culture and the environment, and I can't wait to hear more about Ian's transformation and work. So welcome, Ian, and thank you so much for taking the time to be on my show today.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So Ian, with an intro like that, I would love to start our conversation by going back to your childhood in Minnesota and to the experiences that shaped your personality in those formative years. So maybe you can paint a picture for us of what it was like for you to grow up the way you did. Maybe you can share one or two key experiences and how they impacted you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Minnesota, which is a state here in the Midwest in the United States. And it was actually a pretty stable upbringing for the most part. I lived in the same house from the age of 2 or 3 all the way until I'd finished college, moved out. And both my parents were educators as well. So it kind of, had that kind of perfect 4-person family upbringing. I kind of jokingly say we had everything except the white picket fence. And of course, I say that facetiously because we all have our challenges, but it was a pretty stable upbringing. And I think actually from that, as I, began to autonomize and individuate as a person, I actually tried to push the boundaries a little bit and create some of my own chaos in life. So it actually led to, during adolescence, I actually started using drugs and alcohol, which led to about a decade, 12 years of substance use. Thankfully, I'm about 7 years sober now. And so that was a big kind of transformative experience in there as well. Certainly shifted the family dynamics quite a bit. And then, moving on, education was always something that was really highly valued in my family naturally with 2 parents as educators. And so finished high school, went to college and thought, I wanted to be a therapist, realized that I was really struggling to deal with my own challenges. So probably wouldn't be the best fit for helping other people deal with their challenges. And it was right around that time, right after I finished school, where I kind of had that transformational experience that really kind of changed the trajectory of my life. But throughout all of that, childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, nature was really a place for me to go and find retreat, find respite, really let kind of the waters of life calm and settle and kind of regain traction. So that's why I say, values are kind of grounded in the landscapes of Minnesota, because it was always a place that I found myself retreating back to.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I spent most of my childhood just in nature as well, because I just loved it. Well, it's no wonder I studied biology. It was just so fascinating. Yeah. Now, as you already mentioned, you had this single mystical experience that I would love to learn more about. So would you mind sharing what happened and how it eventually changed the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, I can share. And excuse me as I still struggle to wrap words around the experience from time to time. Um, so, to give a little bit of context, sophomore year in college, I was living with some friends in a house over the summer, and we ended up kind of adopting a dog. And our lease was up at the end of the summer, but we had inherited this dog, and then it was kind of our responsibility to decide where's it going to go, right? Who's going to take her? Her name was Trina. And so I said, I come from a dog family. I feel pretty confident. I feel pretty capable. I stepped up to the plate and asked the guys if they'd be willing to let me take her, and they all agreed. I ended up actually moving back in with my parents at that time. So I went back home with this dog. I'm not sure how happy my parents were about that. But I really looked at her as an opportunity to help me develop some more self-agency and responsibility in my life. I think that it was a little bit conscious, but it was mostly subconscious in terms of how I was kind of approaching that relationship with that animal. And she was in our lives for the next 5 to 6 years. She was not the healthiest of pups, so there were multiple dog bite incidences. And I was just really not in a place to provide for her the life that I thought she deserved. And also felt like near the end, it was kind of inhibiting me from moving forward in my own life as well. So after trying everything under the sun, from doggy medication to doggy psychologists to training out the wazoo, we ended up deciding that we needed to let her go and put her down early. She was probably about 6 at the time, because we inherited her pretty young. And that was really, at that time, I was probably 8 or 9 years into substance use. And it was a really traumatic experience, quite frankly. We had pets growing up, but they were never my pet. It was always the family's dog, right? And about 5 days after we put her down, I was laying in bed awake at one night on my back, staring at the ceiling, just kind of going over all the dreams that I was having. And she poked her nose in the door, and she walked in the room, and she hopped up on the bed next to me. And for anyone who's had a pet, they'll be able to resonate with this notion of like a few days, few weeks after they're physically gone, there's still that energetic absence in the home. And I was still absolutely in that phase. And so it wasn't odd to me, because she poked her nose in the door and hopped up on the bed all the time, every night, right? Every night. And so I rolled over to face her, and I could see her and I could hear her, but she wasn't making an imprint on the mattress. And she curled up next to me, and she let out her kind of patented sigh, like, it's time to go to sleep now. And I just fell asleep instantly. And I woke up the next morning, and I was using journaling as a means to process a lot of my emotions and just life in general at the time. And so I started writing about it as if it were a dream. And it wasn't until maybe 15, 20 minutes into that journaling session that I kind of had the realization that I was actually awake when it happened. And I tell everyone when I tell the story, it was a good thing that I was home alone, because I have never cried like that before in my life or since. And it was a complete shift in my perception of reality, quite frankly.
Wow.
It was so profound. It was so mystical. I had no way to comprehend what had just happened. And so I decided, I got to go, at that time, kind of naively, I got to go figure out this whole spirituality thing. So that's when I started pursuing mindfulness-based practices, energy arts, etc. But that was really that was the pivotal moment in my life that changed the trajectory of, I need to start taking care of myself. I need to start taking things a bit more seriously. And really devote myself to something that's a little bit more meaningful than the life that I've been living.
Wow. So what would you say was the shift towards you felt like you were connected to something bigger, or what was the meaning you assigned to this experience?
Yeah, the initial takeaway was testament to there is something beyond the life that I see, right? There is this spiritual realm beyond what I'm experiencing in my day to day. And I think that was just the impetus to consciously and subconsciously register there's more to life, right? On many different levels. And there's so much out there yet to be explored, so much out there yet to be understood. And so I think that was the first bit, right? It was just there's more, and there's something beyond. And so I started just kind of diving into that space, or strategies and tactics that I thought would help me get acclimated in that space, that spiritual realm, that next dimension of life that I was now really curious about. And from there, it led to a number of different, kind of realizations along the way. But that was the first one. And I think it was also probably the most seismic shift, right? Because it completely altered the landscape, the foundation of my understanding.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes this one shift in belief to see the entire world in a different light, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, if it's not too personal, I would love to know more about the experiences you kind of mentioned around addiction, because I know that this is something that so many people struggle with, and there's still this huge stigma around addiction. And the only way I think that we can really break this stigma is to openly talk about those experiences without judgment, because people need to understand that struggling with addiction is not something to be ashamed of, and that it's really essential to let go of all the shame and guilt in order to move forward and heal, right?
It's not too personal, and I really appreciate that setup, specifically around we need to be talking about it and let go of the shame and the guilt. I think there's a lot of these stigmas that we really need to kind of like let them breathe and get them out in the open. So I appreciate that setup. It's not too personal at all. Thanks for asking. Growing up, I was undiagnosed ADHD. And I'm pretty sure also undiagnosed, just like a generalized anxiety disorder. I think those two probably went closely hand in hand. And also kind of going back to my opening statements around having a pretty stable childhood and wanting to create some of my own chaos. By the time I hit adolescence, I was doing fine in school, but I was constantly restless and anxious. And so, when you turn 12, 13, 14, and you start to realize that you can think for yourself and make decisions for yourself, I happen to have some friends and they happen to be into that sort of thing. And so it just started, smoking a little bit of marijuana, and then it turned into an everyday, multiple times a day thing, because now that I look back on it, I realize I was self-medicating. It was the thing that was allowing me to, kind of keep my anxiety in check. And it was also something that allowed me to down regulate my mind and my nervous system, right? Those things are kind of naturally upregulated for people who have ADD with hyperactivity and anxiety often. So I think it was just self-medication. Over the years, I learned that my anxiety and my depression were closely connected. Anxiety was often the antecedent, and it would lead to bouts of depression. So if I could keep my anxiety in check, it would help with the depression thing, but I didn't know that in the beginning. And so, I was still doing all the things that society would tell you to do, seeing a therapist and trying to take care of my mental health and those types of things. But for anyone who's truly struggled with addiction, they know it's not that easy, right? You can't just tick a couple boxes and expect it to go away. Same thing for people who struggle with, anxiety, depression, other mental health disorders. So it was, it's a messy kind of entangled space, and it dominated 10 years of my life, the landscape of my life. Looking back on it, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I learned so much about myself, and I'm hoping that's actually one thing that we can talk about today in terms of the Wired for Success component, is how critical self-awareness actually is in the definition of success. But I think, that journey with addiction, substance abuse, depression, anxiety, it all evolved. And it kind of culminated in that experience with my dog, which was the notion of, okay, clearly the things that I've been doing haven't gotten to the root cause here. So I'm going to kind of wipe the table clean and go back to the drawing board and really give this 100%, the old college try, like really go all in, because the surface level approaches just hadn't worked until that time.
Yeah, I totally relate to that as well, because I have struggled with anxiety and depression in my life as well at some points. So I know what that's like. And I know that this can be a slippery slope when you start to experiment with maybe substances, or I mean, in my case, I guess I was lucky that I didn't have friends who were experimenting with
Mhm.
drugs. So I just never really got into that scene. But something that I found really, really helpful over the years was um, different behavioral strategies. For instance, breath work is something that works so well for anxiety, and just down regulating your stress level and up regulating your stress tolerance, which is something that really helps me to stay more calm and focused these days. But yeah, I totally I totally understand what it's like to be in this restless, anxious state of mind where you can't really focus and everything feels like a struggle. Now, what would you say are the main lessons that you have learned about addiction in general, and how can we use those lessons to really support people in our lives who might be struggling with addiction right now?
Hmm. I think to answer your second question first, there's a couple things that I would say. One is patience is key.
Mhm.
I was so fortunate to have a patient family, parents and sister. They were more than patient. And I needed that. I needed every bit of time that they gave me. And I needed every bit of safe space that they would allow me to come home to. The second thing that I would say is, particularly if you're someone who hasn't had firsthand experience with depression, anxiety, substance abuse, etc., specifically with addiction, recognize that it is truly a disorder. It is not something as simple as just stop X and then life will get better. It doesn't, it's not that simple, right? And so if that's your understanding of it right now, I would encourage you to learn more about it, right? And I wouldn't necessarily encourage you to go to the person who's dealing with substance abuse or addiction. Do a little bit of reading and research on your own, educate yourself a bit so that you can have a more sophisticated conversation with the person that you're trying to support and show up for, or that you're kind of, enmeshed in that challenging relationship with. So those are my first couple thoughts about how to, support people that are dealing with it. In terms of the lessons that I learned, I would go back to self-awareness. And self-awareness, I think, came second. But the first impetus that really helped me stay grounded on the path of self-discovery was this notion that, if I could articulate it this way, the deeper that I understand myself and the more authentically I can understand what's going to work for me particularly and what's not, was huge. And also that there was purpose in that journey that at the time was far more important than happiness.
Mhm.
Happiness wasn't even on my radar, right? I mean, if you're someone who struggles with chronic depression, you're thinking about it, but you're not really contemplating it as a reality for you because you're so deep in the pits of despair. And so I really had to hold on to that purpose, right? And that purpose of continuing to turn over the next stone, continuing to take the next step, is what built a foundation for self-awareness. And that, I think probably in your audience listeners, a lot of the entrepreneurs that I work with who are building businesses, what I find actually is, perhaps it's just the people that gravitate towards me, a lot of us are in the same boat, right? We kind of have this chip on our shoulder, or we had something happen growing up, or we ourselves struggle with depression and anxiety, and we're I don't want to say out to prove something, but it's
Yeah.
almost like we're trying to perform our way out of our human experience, right? If I can just add the next healthy habit, if I can get to the next income level, if I can XYZ, then life will be, whatever we hope it to be. And that formula has not worked for me. And I think it's one that doesn't really work for human nature. And so, again, it would ground back into that self-awareness. And so what I tell people in my work now, whether it be with individuals, speaking to audiences, or whether it be with, organizations, consultants, and the consulting work that I do and the teams that I work with, is we're trying to use a systematic approach in order to get to context-specific solutions, right?
Mhm.
And so you brought up breath work. It's fantastic. I use it too. But if you were to tell someone, just go do breath work, there are certain types of breath work that are going to work for some, but not others, right?
True.
I hate the square breath. I hate breath retention because it activates my anxiety.
It
And
does.
so it's really understanding, it's back into that self-awareness piece, right? And that takes consistency and diligence to continually learn. I think it's part of human nature to always want to grow and experience more of life, to experience more abundance, however you want to define abundance, however you want to define success. But there are certain things that are going to be more appropriate for your constitution and you as an individual than others. And if you don't have that self-awareness or that propensity to pay attention, to learn, do I need cardio today or strength training? Do I need to be with people or be alone? Then it becomes harder to take a systematic approach because you're just kind of shooting from the hip in the dark.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree about self-awareness and how important it is. And I think it also holds the key for maybe overcoming addiction, because when you're self-aware enough to understand what you're getting from whatever substance you're using, like you said, for you it was down regulating your nervous system, something like that. So you can find different ways of achieving the same goal without the substance. So I think that it really holds the key for so many things, probably most of the things in your life. And the other things that I wanted to come back to, what you mentioned, was that so many people just chase one milestone after the other. And this is something that I've seen a lot, where it's this theme of seeing happiness as a destination rather than a journey. And it's just not like that. It's not a destination. You never reach that point where you live happily ever after. That's just a fairy tale. You still have to work on it every single day. And you have to learn to enjoy the ride, enjoy the roller coaster. So one thing that I wanted to come back to as well is the quote I mentioned in the beginning, because you were saying that saving ourselves is the only path to saving the world. So can you expand on that?
Yeah. Another way to say it is the only way out is in and through,
Yeah.
right? So to your point about always trying to reach the next milestone, first of all, why do we do it, right? Somewhere inside, there's this belief that when we get the next whatever, it's going to bring joy, happiness, peace, whatever it is that we're chasing. And so the thing that I would ask your listeners is, think about something that was excellent 5 years ago. Whether it's the promotion, the relationship, the new car, it doesn't matter what it is. And there's nothing wrong about what brings you joy. But think about that joy and that high, that euphoric high that you experienced when you got that thing that happened 3, 5, 10 years ago. Have you sustained that high? If the answer to that question is yes, then I'd love to talk to you because you must know something I don't. But I think for most of us, that answer is no, right? That high happens and it comes and it goes. It's just like a natural bell curve. And that in and of itself should be the only thing that we need to be aware of, to know this formula that we're using to live life, the next level of success, the next income bracket, is not what's actually going to bring lasting peace and happiness.
Yeah.
And I think it's foundational to the entire conversation. And it's why, in terms of the work that I do with clients, I'm always telling them, we're going to do this business operation, process efficiency stuff to give you the bandwidth to think about employee engagement and well-being in a more authentic way. So I don't work with, organizations in a, like the traditional comp and benefits employee well-being type of way. We need to build habits, tiny habits into your day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month workflows that create the foundation for well-being, however your organization defines well-being, right? Or if you're an individual, however you define well-being. So I think it goes back to the self-awareness, but I think it also goes back to the question of how do you define success? And it's not a problem that many of us choose to define success the way that society tells us what success is. But I think, at least for me, through my decade worth of substance abuse and grappling with depression and anxiety, I realized that isn't how I define success. More income's not going to make me happier to the extent that the income increases, right? It's not a direct one-to-one correlation. And I know that because when I spend a week in the woods by myself eating freeze-dried foods, I come back happier and healthier every single time, right? So you got to find that relationship inside and continue to kind of grind the axe in terms of what actually brings me the feelings that I want to be feeling on a more consistent basis, and then reorient your target of success in that direction, as opposed to, monies, cars, jobs, etc., the things that are kind of stereotypically that we associate with success.
Yeah, so true. And while we're defining things, I would love to hear your opinion about what makes a good leader and what does a healthy company culture look like to you?
I guess I would actually go back to your last question, right? Saving ourselves is the only way we're going to save the planet. The cliche of leaders lead by example. I'm fortunate every day to work with business leaders who recognize I'm here because I want to offer this organization something more than just monetary compensation, something more than just health benefits. I want to build a culture that enhances people's lives and well-being. And so this notion of, saving ourselves is what is going to save the planet. The only way out is in. It's people and leaders. And I don't just mean, the hierarchical leadership, people in executive leadership positions in the organization. There are leaders of culture at every place in the organization. Oftentimes they're the frontline staff, who are really the early adopters and the innovators of culture. But it's focusing inward and recognizing that the organization is an organism. It's a single organism. And you can't approach it like you would a piece of hardware, right? Single inputs don't necessarily make the output that you expect, because we're human beings and we change on a day-to-day basis. And one day you'll show up and the team is high performing and everyone's in a great mood. And then the next day or that afternoon, something shifted. And all of a sudden you're not operating with the same level of efficiency or whatever you want to call it. I think it goes back to the self-awareness of the leadership, to recognize that it's not a top-down approach. That is not leadership. Leadership is bottom-up, right? You actually lead by following from behind. And the business leaders that I've worked with who recognize that and understand that and really, truly practice it, make it a part of their daily personal and professional practice to be a part of the team and to learn what's valuable and meaningful to the team, and then do their best to offer that to the team. Those are the people that are actually the most successful.
I love that approach. Now, I know that you have a new book coming out with the title Soil and Spirit, Seeds of Purpose, Nature's Insight, and the Deep Work of Transformational Change. And I'd love to know more about it. So in a nutshell, what inspired you to write the book? What is it all about? And why should people buy it?
Yeah. You might have to break those three down for me back here in a moment.
Sure.
The book is my attempt at offering my version to the world of trying to make the world a better place, right? Creating systemic change for the common good. And it's based off of some of the foundational principles that we've talked about in this conversation: self-awareness, health and well-being, society at large, spirituality, and then how we as individuals and how we as a collective species impact the environment, and vice versa. Right. So we didn't take any time today to talk about climate change, and we don't necessarily need to because we don't have the time. But I think for me, that's something that's a daily motivator. If we can't figure out the climate change thing, we're going to have a lot bigger problems on our hands 5, 10, 20 years from now than those that we have right now. And I think we absolutely have people across the globe that are recognizing we need to change our definition of success. It's not necessarily about quarterly profits and earnings, right? It's about building not just sustainable business practices, but regenerative business practices. And I should clarify that the book is not a business book. It is a book about personal and spiritual transformation. And that key phrase at the end in the subtitle, transformational change, is really what I'm trying to guide the reader or the listener to. This notion that incremental improvements, right? Adding the next healthy habit, getting to the next income bracket, etc., to recognize those are not the things that are going to bring you what you're really seeking inside. They're never going to fill the void that you feel on the inside. The way to do that is to turn inward, is to go deep, and to recognize that doing your own internal work is really the only way to bring about the change and the life that you want to experience. So that's what the book is about. It's a big picture book. It's a book for change makers and deep thinkers. It's a book for people in transition who are looking for the next, bit of insight, or maybe it's, hopefully that catalyst that is that thing that catapults you into the next chapter of your life. But it's really about the importance of saving ourselves and how that's going to be required if we're going to figure out all of this social and environmental justice stuff that we're grappling with as a species right now.
That sounds great. And I hope that people go and check it out. We'll definitely put a link in the show notes for them. So last but not least, where can our listeners find you if they would like to learn more about you or connect with you online?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So if you want to find me, reviveuandi.com, reviveuandi.com. So that's my own personal website. So that's where you'll find the book, you'll find my speaking. It's also a link to all of my consulting services, major social media channels. It's the same handle @reviveuandi. If there are business leaders out there who might be interested in speaking about organizational consulting services, I've got actually a separate website for that, which is stillpointinsight.com. So I just drew a line in the sand because it's a little bit more, it's just easier to talk about. I've kind of got always two different brands of reputations to uphold. And one is kind of personal spiritual development. And the other is working with mission-driven organizations to help them increase their impact and build healthy cultures. So reviveuandi.com is probably the landing ground. It's a homepage, and you'll be in the ecosystem from there.
Awesome. Ian, again, thank you so much for the important work that you do and for sharing your story and your insights with us today. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Claudia.
Take care and talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Wired for Success podcast. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That's a fantastic, easy, and zero-cost way to help the show grow. Just use the link in the show notes and make my day. If you'd like to take it one step further, you can now join my inner circle and become an official supporter of the Wired for Success podcast. Supporting the show is super simple and will only take you about 30 seconds. Basically, it works like any other paid subscription. All you have to do is go to glow.fm/Wired for Success podcast, pay $5 per month or as much or as little as you like, and choose the link of the podcast player you want to use. You can listen anywhere in any app. So for less than the price of 1 to 2 fancy coffees per month, you can really make a difference and help me keep this show awesome. For more tips and info, check out my website at www.wiredforsuccess.solutions. Thank you so much and talk to you soon.